My bags hit the mud just outside the heavy doors of the Silver Creek Lodge. Before the sting of his betrayal could fully sink in, my husband Liam smirked, waving that signed authorization paper in the freezing rain. "Get off my ranch, you washed-up little princess. If you're still on my property in an hour, I'm calling the sheriff." I didn't cry. I just stared silently at the iron gates, knowing full well he was the one who wouldn't survive the night. To understand how I ended up thrown into the freezing mud outside my own home, you have to go back to when the Silver Creek Lodge was still my sanctuary. 5 years ago, I was just Clara Vance. I wasn't interested in corporate boardrooms or ruthless profit margins. My heart belonged to the wide-open Montana sky and the magnificent quarter horses my family had bred for generations. And then there was Liam. He wasn't born into old money or a legacy of power. He was just a ranch hand who had worked his way up to become the ranch manager. His hands were calloused, his boots were always worn, and to me, he was everything real and grounded that my privileged, suffocating world lacked. Despite the quiet whispers from the old Montana families about the naive heiress marrying the hired help, I loved him. I loved him with a completely open, trusting heart. On our wedding day, my grandfather, Silas Vance, handed us the deed to the Silver Creek Lodge. It wasn't just a house. It was the crown jewel of the Vance Empire, sitting right on the crucial water sources for the entire valley. "This is your foundation, Clara," my grandfather had said, his piercing eyes staring down Liam. "Do not let it crumble." I was so blindly in love, I was so certain of our future, that I handed Liam full legal control of the ranch's daily operations. I just wanted to raise my horses, completely confident that my strong, capable cowboy was protecting our legacy. For the next few years, it truly felt like a dream. Liam was attentive, always making sure I was taken care of. He played the part of the devoted, hard-working husband perfectly. The only dark cloud was his older brother, Wyatt. Wyatt was a sleazy local landbroker who always smelled of cheap cologne and desperate schemes. He started hanging around the lodge more and more, drinking our whiskey and whispering constantly in Liam's ear. I didn't like Wyatt, but I tolerated him because he was family. I thought I was the luckiest woman in the territory. I thought the sturdy timber walls of the lodge would protect us forever. And I didn't realize the rot was already eating away at the foundation from the inside. The storm didn't roll in over the mountains. It came through a simple phone call on a quiet Tuesday evening. Liam and Wyatt were out on the porch, and I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The caller ID flashed. It was my grandfather. I picked it up with a bright smile. "Grandpa, how are you? We were just about to eat." But the voice on the other end wasn't the roaring, invincible patriarch I had known my entire life. He sounded incredibly old. He sounded absolutely defeated. "Clara, listen to me carefully. You need to brace yourself." My blood ran completely cold. "Grandpa, what's wrong? What happened?" A heavy, suffocating silence hung on the line before he finally spoke. "The feds, Clara. The federal government just raided the main corporate office." My ears started ringing loudly. "The feds? Grandpa, what are you talking about? It's a massive environmental violation, Clara." His voice broke, something I had never heard before. Someone dumped toxic chemicals into the upper creek, right on our property line. The EPA is freezing everything, the accounts, the operating funds, the trust, all of it. We are facing hundreds of millions in federal fines. The ranch, the legacy, it might all be gone. "I'm sorry, my girl. I can't protect you this time." The smartphone slipped from my trembling fingers and clattered harshly against the hardwood floor. The entire room started to spin. A century of Vance history, the land I loved more than life itself, wiped out in an instant. Hearing the commotion, Liam and Wyatt rushed into the kitchen. "Clara, what is it? What did the old man say?" Liam asked, or gripping my shoulders. Tears were already streaming down my face. I could barely choke out the terrifying words about the federal raid, the frozen accounts, the impending bankruptcy. I expected Liam to pull me into his arms. I expected him to tell me we would fight this together, that we would save the herd and the land. But as I looked up into my husband's eyes, desperately seeking comfort, I didn't see shock. I didn't see a single ounce of fear for our future. He didn't reach out to hold me. Instead, he simply looked over my shoulder at his brother. I saw a look pass between him and Wyatt. It wasn't panic. It was a cold, calculating, intensely hungry gleam. It was the look of scavengers. Finally watching a magnificent beast bleed out in the dirt. The silence in the kitchen was suffocating. It hung in the air, heavy and cold, while completely swallowing the warmth of the life I thought we had built. I stared at Liam, my husband, the man I had trusted with my heart and my family's legacy, waiting for him to tell me it was going to be all right. I waited for the loving cowboy who always knew how to calm a spooked horse to pull me in and say we would weather this storm together. But he didn't move. He just stood there, exchanging that sickening, victorious look with his brother Wyatt. And then the change happened. It wasn't gradual. It spread across his face instantly, like a shadow swallowing the valley at dusk. The gentle, protective mask he had worn for 5 long years simply melted away. He looked down at me, still trembling on the floor, and his eyes were entirely foreign. There was no love left in them, not even basic human pity. There was only a cold, hard contempt. Well, well, well. Liam suddenly laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made my skin crawl. Looks like the great Vance Empire isn't so untouchable after all. I was paralyzed. Every word he spoke felt like a physical blow. Liam, what are you saying? I'm saying the free ride is over, Clara, he snapped, his voice echoing loudly off the timber walls. You really thought you were so special, didn't you? Sitting up here in your $1 million lodge playing the generous little princess while I broke my back running this place. Your grandfather always looked at me like I was just dirt on his boots. And you let him. Liam, that's not true, I stammered, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. We gave you everything. This was our home, your home, he roared, kicking a chair out of his way. It was never my home. It was a shiny cage. Every time I walked through those front doors, I was reminded that I didn't earn any of it. I was just the charity case. The poor ranch hand the Vance family decided to dress up and pretend was an equal. Well, look who's the charity case now. I couldn't breathe. The cruelty in his voice was absolute. Wyatt chuckled darkly from the corner, leaning against the counter and taking a long sip of our whiskey. You better face reality, princess, Wyatt sneered. Your daddy's money is gone. The feds are going to strip this place down to the dirt. You're nothing now. Just a broke girl who doesn't know the first thing about surviving in the real world. I curled into myself on the cold floor. The shock was so immense it felt like I was drowning. But in that dark, suffocating moment, an agonizing truth began to take shape in my mind. People always ask how someone can turn so viciously against the very hand that fed them, how a man given a home, power, and unconditional love could transform into a monster the second the money dries up. In social psychology, there's a brutal reality that very few people are willing to admit: the resentment of gratitude. When my family handed Liam the keys to a multi-million-dollar ranch and elevated his status overnight, we thought we were building a foundation for love. But in reality, we had unknowingly strapped a ticking time bomb to our marriage. When the gap in power and wealth is that massive, the receiver doesn't actually feel grateful. They feel stripped of their dignity. Living under the unspoken label of the man who married into money created a toxic, festering wound inside him. Every expensive piece of furniture, or every acre of land I put in his name didn't make him feel like a king. It whispered to him every single day that he was just a parasite. So when the news of my grandfather's downfall hit, Liam's first instinct wasn't to run away. It wasn't fear. It was a sick, twisted, euphoric release. He finally saw the princess dragged down into the mud. He was crushing me, tearing down my family's name, to rebuild his own fragile, pathetic ego. Giving that much power to a man without the inner strength to hold it wasn't an act of love. It was suicide. We had armed a traitor and invited him to sleep in our bed. "Get up!" Liam barked, his voice violently pulling me back to the nightmare in my kitchen. "Stop crying on the floor like a pathetic child. If you think I'm going down with a sinking ship because of your old man's mistakes, you are out of your mind." He didn't offer a hand. He just turned his back on me and walked into the living room, pouring himself a drink with his brother. They were celebrating the death of my family's legacy. I was utterly alone in the house my ancestors built, surrounded by men who couldn't wait to pick the bones clean. The harsh sound of Liam's laughter was still ringing in my ears when Wyatt finally set his whiskey glass down on the granite counter with a heavy thud. He walked over to where I was still kneeling on the floor, his boots loud against the wood. He didn't look at me with anger like Liam did. He looked at me with cold, calculating pity. "Listen to me very carefully, Clara," Wyatt said, his voice dropping to a low, urgent murmur. "Your husband is angry and he has every right to be... But right now, we don't have time for a family feud. We have a massive crisis on our hands and you need to wake up." I looked up at him, my vision blurred with tears. What do you mean?" "The feds froze the accounts, Clara," Wyatt snapped, leaning in closer. "Do you even understand what that means for a ranch this size? It means the fuel trucks for the generators won't arrive tomorrow. It means the electric pumps for the deep wells shut down. We have thousands of head of cattle out in the lower basin, and it hasn't rained in 3 weeks. Without water, they will be dead in a matter of days. Thousands of them, Clara, rotting under the Montana sun." My breath caught in my throat. The cattle, my horses. The Silver Creek Lodge wasn't just land to me. It was a living, breathing sanctuary. The thought of those innocent animals suffering, dying of thirst because my family's legacy was collapsing. It was a nightmare I couldn't bear. "We have to do something," I pleaded, scrambling to my feet, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "We have to buy feed. We have to get water trucks." "With what money?" Liam barked from the living room, stepping back into the kitchen. "Your grandfather's name is toxic right now. No bank in this state will touch us. We are radioactive, Clara." Wyatt held up a hand, playing the calm mediator perfectly. "There is one way. But we have to move right now. Tonight." He walked over to his leather briefcase on the dining table, snapped the brass locks open, and pulled out a thick stack of documents. He threw them onto the table. The heavy thud of those papers felt like a judge's gavel striking the wood. "I have some private investors," Wyatt explained smoothly, tapping the top page. "People who operate outside the traditional banking system. They can wire an emergency bridge loan into a clean offshore account by tomorrow morning. It will be enough to keep the fuel flowing, pay the ranch hands in cash, and keep this herd alive while your grandfather sorts out his legal mess." I stared at the dense, intimidating stack of legal jargon. "Thank God," I whispered, a desperate wave of relief washing over me. "Okay, let's do it." Wyatt didn't smile. He just pushed a pen toward me. "There is a catch, Clara. These investors aren't running a charity. They need ironclad collateral. Since the main property deeds are tied up in the federal investigation, the only thing they will accept as leverage are the water rights." I froze. The water rights? In Montana, land is just dirt. Said the water rights are the actual lifeblood. Whoever controls the water of Silver Creek controls the entire valley. My grandfather had drilled that into my head since I was a little girl. I can't sign away the water rights," I stammered, backing away from the table. "Grandpa said the core of the ranch. Your grandfather is the one who just destroyed this family." Liam suddenly exploded, slamming his fist against the wall. He marched toward me, his face twisted in manufactured rage. "He lied to you. He ruined us. And now you're going to stand there and quote his rules while everything we built dies of thirst?" He cornered me against the kitchen island, his tall frame casting a dark shadow over me. "I am trying to save this ranch, Clara. I am trying to save those animals you claim to love so much. Do you want to wake up on Friday to a valley full of rotting carcasses? Is that the legacy you want to leave? No. No, of course not. I sobbed, completely overwhelmed by the guilt, the fear, and the ticking clock they had so brilliantly constructed in my mind. "Then sign the damn papers," Liam yelled, pointing at the table. "It's a temporary authorization, a water rights authorization agreement to secure the loan. As soon as the feds clear your grandfather, we pay the loan back and the rights revert to us. It is just a formality to get the cash flowing by sunrise." I looked at the documents again. I didn't see the legal traps. I didn't see the clauses that would strip me of my inheritance. All I saw was a desperate lifeline. They were weaponizing my deepest vulnerability. My love for the Silver Creek Lodge and every living creature on it. "We need it signed right now, Clara," Wyatt pressured softly, holding out the pen. "The investors are waiting for my call. Every minute you hesitate is another drop of water those animals won't get." My mind was a chaotic storm of panic and despair. I felt entirely alone, backed into a corner by the only two people left standing in the wreckage of my life. I believed the emergency was real. I believed Liam was finally stepping up to protect our home. With trembling hands, I reached out and I took the pen. A lot of people who only heard about the collapse of the Silver Creek Lodge long after the dust had finally settled. They always look at me with this mix of pity and disbelief. They always repeat the exact same thing to me. "Clara, you should have just called a lawyer. You should have picked up the phone and called your grandfather back to verify." They wonder how I could be so incredibly stupid, so hopelessly naive, to just silently sign a massive stack of legal documents I didn't even read. It is so incredibly easy to sit in the comfort of a quiet, brightly lit room, completely safe from the raging storm outside, and judge the desperate choices of someone who is actively drowning. It is easy to be rational when your life isn't on the line, but you have to understand. In that kitchen, on that terrible night, I wasn't thinking like a shrewd businesswoman. I wasn't thinking like the proud heiress to the Vance empire. I was just a terrified girl watching her entire universe shatter into a million jagged pieces. My entire world. Everything my family had built with their bare hands, their sweat, and their blood for over 100 years was evaporating right in front of my eyes. The heavy timber walls of the lodge felt like they were physically shrinking, crushing the air straight out of my lungs. All I could hear echoing in my mind was Wyatt's cruel, urgent voice, thousands of cattle, rotting under the brutal Montana sun. I loved those animals. I knew every acre of that valley, and I loved this land more than my own life. The crushing guilt of being the one in charge when the federal government came to tear our legacy down to the dirt. It was completely paralyzing. And then there was Liam. When you are standing in the middle of a blazing, out-of-control fire, and the man you love, the man you stood before God and swore to spend the rest of your life with, suddenly steps in front of you holding a shield. You don't stop to question what that shield is made of. You just hide behind it, trembling and grateful. For 5 long years, I had wholeheartedly believed he was my equal partner. He was my sturdy, reliable cowboy, the man who could fix any broken fence, tame any wild horse, and calm any raging storm. I couldn't see the monster hiding behind the mask. He weaponized my love. He weaponized my absolute, unwavering devotion to this valley, and he used it to weave the most flawless, suffocating trap imaginable. He and his brother manufactured an atmosphere of pure, unfiltered panic. The ticking clock they created wasn't just a threat. It was a heavy physical weight pressing down on my chest. Sign it now, or everything dies. Sign it now, or the legacy is wiped off the map by tomorrow morning. When a woman sees her husband seemingly stepping up to shoulder a catastrophic burden, Every single rational protective defense mechanism she possesses just shuts down. I didn't see the cold, calculating legal jargon printed on those pages. I didn't see the hidden clauses that would legally strip away my birthright and hand it over to a scavenger. When I looked down at those blurry pages, I only saw my grandfather, isolated, old, and defeated by the feds. I only saw a desperate lifeline being thrown into the raging, icy water. I didn't silently bow my head and sign those papers because I was uneducated. I didn't sign them because I didn't understand how contract law worked. I signed my name because I was starving for a miracle. I was so utterly terrified of the brutal reality we were facing that I consciously chose to blindly cling to the impossible promise of a liar, rather than accept the fact that I was entirely powerless. My naivety, my blind, foolish, romantic trust, it had to be paid for in blood and tears. It was the most brutal, agonizing lesson of my entire life, and it burned a harsh, unforgiving truth into my soul that I will never, ever forget. When the sky turns black and the storm threatens to wash away everything you hold dear, do not ever close your eyes and hand the reins to someone else, not even to the person sharing your bed, not even to the man you love, just because they promise to navigate you through the dark, because sometimes the person offering to guide you safely out of the storm, this is the exact same person who summoned the rain. The storm outside the Silver Creek Lodge was raging now, the freezing Montana rain lashing against the massive glass windows like a desperate warning I was completely too blind to see. I had the pen gripped tightly in my trembling hand, but some small, surviving instinct deep inside my chest made me hesitate. I looked down at the dense, intimidating pages of the Water Rights Authorization Agreement. It felt fundamentally wrong. Relinquishing the very lifeblood of the entire valley shouldn't happen like this, on a kitchen island in the middle of a chaotic night. My grandfather Silas had always told me that the land was just dirt, but the water was power. You never surrender the power, Clara. His voice echoed faintly in my memory. Just as I opened my mouth to demand we wait for the morning light to call my own attorneys, the heavy oak front door violently swung open. A gust of freezing wind swept into the warm room, and a strange man stepped inside. He was an older gentleman, impeccably dressed in a sharp, expensive gray suit that was barely damp from the storm. He carried a structured leather briefcase and wore the stern, exhausted expression of a highly important man who had been rudely pulled away from a very busy life. Wyatt immediately rushed over, taking the man's wet overcoat with an exaggerated display of respect. "Clara," Wyatt said, his voice dripping with forced, breathless relief. "This is Mr. Sterling. He is the Regional Credit Director for the Agricultural Cooperative Bank out in Helena. I had to call in every single favor I have in this entire state to get him to drive up the mountain passes in this weather." Mr. Sterling didn't offer a polite smile. He walked straight to the granite island, snapped open his briefcase, and began pulling out heavy brass stamps, a thick notary seal, and official-looking bank folios. He didn't look at me with sympathy. He looked at me like I was a massive, frustrating inconvenience to his schedule. "Mrs. Vance, let's make this exceptionally quick," he said, his voice clipped and aggressively professional. "I am breaking a dozen internal lending protocols just being here at this hour. The sudden federal freeze on your grandfather's corporate assets has triggered a red alert across all our lending networks. And the only reason my board of directors authorized this emergency bridge loan is because of the water rights serving as collateral. Without those rights legally transferred tonight, there is no money." I watched him arrange the papers with practiced, precise movements. Every single detail about him screamed unquestionable legitimacy. The crisp tailoring of his suit, the heavy gold watch, the impatient, authoritative way he tapped his expensive fountain pen against the marble counter. I just need to read exactly what happens to the rights when the loan is fully repaid," I stammered. my fingers hovering nervously over the signature line, my heart pounding in my ears. Mr. Sterling sighed incredibly loudly, shooting a deeply frustrated look at Liam. "You absolutely do not have the time to read 40 pages of standard financial boilerplate, Mrs. Vance. The international wire cutoff for the offshore clearance is exactly at midnight. If I do not have these documents signed, officially notarized, and uploaded to our secure server in the next 20 minutes, the automated system locks us out completely until next Tuesday." Tuesday. The word echoed in my frantic mind like a brutal death sentence. By Tuesday, the massive backup generators would run entirely dry. Thousands of our cattle would be dead, rotting under the sun. Liam slammed his hand down hard on the table, leaning his tall frame right into my face. "Are you seriously going to play amateur lawyer right now, Clara? We have a senior bank director standing in our kitchen at midnight, risking his job to save your family's dying legacy, and you are insulting him. Sign the damn papers so we can save this ranch." The pressure in that room was absolutely suffocating. It was a terrifying, flawless masterclass in psychological manipulation. They didn't just hand me a piece of paper to sign. They constructed an elaborate, inescapable theatrical performance. They brought the terrifying, crushing weight of the outside world right into my safe haven. The fake bank director deliberately used complex financial jargon I didn't fully grasp, mixing terms to make my head spin. He used the ticking clock to completely bypass my rational, logical brain, forcing me into a state of pure survival instinct. How could I possibly doubt it all? The heavy brass notary seal was sitting right there. The official bank logos were printed so clearly at the top of the heavy parchment. I was a terrified young woman desperately trying to stop her entire world from burning to the ground, surrounded by 3 authoritative men aggressively telling me this was the only way to put out the fire. So I finally broke. I lowered my head, gripped the cold pen, and signed my name on every single yellow, sticky note Mr. Sterling had so helpfully placed on the pages. I signed away the water. I signed away the valley. I signed away my entire birthright without reading a single actual clause. As soon as my pen lifted from the final fatal page, Mr. Sterling swiftly snatched the documents away. He picked up his heavy brass seal and pressed it down hard onto the paper. Thud. And the sound of that fake seal hitting the granite counter echoed through the quiet kitchen like a heavy coffin lid slamming shut. I didn't know it then. But I hadn't just signed a desperate loan agreement. I had just handed the literal keys to my kingdom to a pack of starving wolves, and willingly locked myself inside the dark cage with them. The heavy brass stamp echoed in the kitchen, but the relief I expected never came. Instead, the very air in the room seemed to freeze. Mr. Sterling didn't offer a polite handshake or a reassuring smile. The facade of the frantic professional bank director vanished in an absolute instant. He methodically shoved his seal into his briefcase, snapped it shut, and looked directly at Wyatt. "Done," he said, his voice completely devoid of any urgency. Wyatt smirked, handing the man a thick, unmarked envelope. "Pleasure doing business with you, Arthur. Have a safe drive back down the mountain." Arthur, not Mr. Sterling. My mind struggled to process the name, spinning in a thick fog of exhaustion and terror. Before I could even ask, Liam stepped forward and snatched the documents right off the granite counter. He held them up in the dim light, admiring my signature like it was a freshly killed hunting trophy. "Liam, what is going on?" I whispered, my voice trembling as a cold dread began to claw at my stomach. "Are the funds being wired?" He looked at me and let out a sharp, piercing laugh. "Funds! You really are just as stupid as the rest of this town always said you were." He threw the papers back down onto the counter, but this time he pointed directly at the fine print hidden beneath those innocent yellow sticky notes. "And this isn't a bridge loan, Clara. This is an absolute transfer of deed and title. You didn't secure a loan for the cattle. You just signed over full, irrevocable control of the water rights, the land, and the Silver Creek Lodge directly into my name. I stumbled back, my legs suddenly unable to hold my own weight. No, you said it was to save the ranch. You promised me. I promised to save myself, Liam roared, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated venom. Did you honestly think I was going to spend the rest of my life playing the loyal servant to your arrogant family? Taking your grandfather's insults? Pretending to be grateful for the miserable scraps you threw me? This ranch is mine now, Clara. I own the water. I own the land. And you own absolutely nothing. The betrayal didn't just break my heart. It ripped my entire soul to pieces. The man I loved, the man I had given my life to, had spent 5 years orchestrating my absolute destruction. Wyatt chuckled darkly, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. He tapped the screen and set it on the kitchen island, hitting the speakerphone button. The line rang twice before a familiar, exhausted voice answered. "Hello?" Silas Vance's voice sounded hollow and broken. "Well, good evening, boss," Wyatt sneered, leaning his weight over the phone. "I hope you're having a wonderful night dealing with the feds." "Wyatt," Silas started, his voice hardening instantly. Don't interrupt me, old man," Wyatt barked. "I'm calling as a courtesy. You see, the Silver Creek Lodge is under new management as of 5 minutes ago. Your brilliant or completely useless granddaughter just signed the entire legacy over to us." There was a dead, heavy silence on the line. I could feel my grandfather's shock, his absolute crushing devastation. "Grandpa, I'm so sorry," I sobbed, reaching desperately for the phone, but Liam violently shoved my hand away. "Listen to me very carefully, Silas," Liam shouted into the phone, his eyes wide with a manic, victorious thrill. "I am giving you exactly 1 hour to come up to this mountain and pick up your pathetic excuse for an heiress. If her bags aren't off my porch in 60 minutes, I am throwing her to the wolves myself. Do you hear me? You broke, arrogant old fool. The Vance Empire is dead." Liam hit the end button, cutting off whatever my grandfather was about to say. He didn't even look at me as a human being anymore. And he looked at me like a disease he had finally cured. "Get out of my house," he hissed, his voice cold as ice. "Liam, please. It's pouring rain. It's freezing outside. I said, get out." He grabbed me by the arm, his grip bruising my skin, and dragged me roughly toward the heavy oak front doors. I fought. I screamed. I begged the man I thought was my husband to wake up from this nightmare. But he just ripped the door open and shoved me violently into the storm. I fell hard into the freezing mud. The icy rain immediately soaked through my clothes, chilling me to the absolute bone. I looked up at the massive, glowing windows of the Silver Creek Lodge, the home my family built, the beautiful sanctuary I had just given away. Liam stood in the doorway staring down at me with pure, unfiltered disgust before slamming the heavy door shut, and the loud thud echoed through the dark, wild valley. I was completely alone in the freezing blackness, stripped of my home, my family's legacy, and every single shred of my dignity. The icy Montana rain was absolutely merciless. It beat down on my soaking wet hair and mixed with the hot tears streaming down my freezing face. I dragged myself out of the thick mud, my hands numb and scraped from the sharp gravel of the driveway. I stood there, shivering in the pitch-black darkness of the wild valley, staring through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the Silver Creek Lodge. It was supposed to be my safe haven. Now, it was a brightly lit stage showcasing my absolute destruction. Through the rain-streaked glass, the living room glowed with a warm, inviting fire. And there he was, Liam, or the man I had vowed to love until the end of my days. He was leaning back comfortably in my grandfather's favorite leather armchair, laughing loudly with his brother. I watched him pull a thick, expensive cigar from a cedar box on the mantel. He clipped the end, lit it with a silver match, and exhaled a long, triumphant plume of white smoke into the air. He looked completely relaxed, completely victorious. There was not a single trace of guilt on his face, not a single ounce of remorse for throwing his wife out into a freezing, deadly storm. Standing there in the bitter cold, watching him celebrate my ruin. A question began to burn fiercely in my chest. It is the exact same question that constantly haunts anyone who hears the story of my catastrophic marriage. Why couldn't he just be satisfied? Why did he have to be so unspeakably cruel? Why would a man intentionally shatter the very golden bowl he was eating from? He had absolutely everything a man could ever ask for. A wife who adored him unconditionally, an influential family that elevated him from a struggling ranch hand to a respected manager, and a guaranteed brilliant future. He possessed a life of incredible privilege that most people could only ever dream of. So why? Why did he choose to burn it all to the ground? The answer, terrifyingly enough, is not just simple greed. Greed is far too logical. Greed is just a desire for more money. What drove Liam to betray me so viciously was something much darker, much deeper, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the toxic, bottomless black hole of his own crippling insecurity. You see, Liam was a deeply flawed man forced to wear a coat that was entirely too big for his fragile ego. The Silver Creek Lodge, this breathtaking multi-million-dollar sanctuary sitting on the most valuable water rights in the state. It was a tangible monument to my family's power. In my eyes, it was a beautiful home built on love and trust. But in Liam's eyes, in the twisted, resentful minds of both him and his brother, it was a daily, unbearable humiliation. Every single time he walked across those hand-scraped hardwood floors, every time he looked out over the thousands of acres of pristine Vance territory, the estate didn't make him feel powerful. It silently mocked him. It constantly whispered in his ear that he didn't build any of it. It reminded him that he was just a hired cowboy, a charity case. A pathetic freeloader who had to marry a rich girl to amount to anything in this world. When you give a massive amount of unearned power to a man with an incredibly small, fragile sense of self-worth, you do not cure his insecurity. You weaponize it. When the news of my grandfather's supposed federal indictment broke, the emotion that flooded Liam's veins wasn't fear of losing our home. It was a sick, euphoric, intoxicating rush of adrenaline. Finally, the untouchable Vance aristocracy was crumbling. Finally, the little princess was being dragged down off her high horse and thrown into the dirt. He didn't orchestrate that elaborate, terrifying scheme with the fake bank director just because he wanted to sell the water rights for a quick profit. No. He did it because he needed to spiritually break me, and he needed to conquer me. He needed to look down at me from the warm, dry comfort of that beautiful lodge, watching me freeze in the mud, just so he could finally feel like a strong, dominant man. He wanted to prove that he was the ultimate master of my fate, that he held the power of life and death over my family's century-old legacy. Ordinary greed might blind a person's judgment, but toxic, festering insecurity is the actual poison that boils the blood. It is the venom that transforms a seemingly gentle, protective husband into a ruthless, cold-blooded monster. I stared through the rain at the man puffing his victory cigar, and the last agonizing shred of my broken heart finally turned to pure, freezing ice. I wasn't just a victim of a financial scam. I was a sacrifice on the altar of his pathetic, fragile ego. The freezing wind howled through the towering pine trees, violently whipping the rain across my face, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the agonizing clarity blooming in my mind. For 5 years, I had slept next to a man who secretly hated me for everything I represented. He had smiled at me across the dinner table, kissed my forehead, and whispered sweet, empty promises in the dark. all while nursing a deeply buried venomous grudge against the very blood running through my veins. I thought I had rescued him from a life of exhausting, back-breaking labor. I thought my love was enough to bridge the massive, intimidating chasm between our two vastly different worlds. But you can never bridge a gap when the other person is busy silently digging the trench deeper and deeper every single day. He didn't want to be my equal. He wanted to be my conqueror. He wanted to steal the crown and wear it while he watched my entire kingdom burn to ashes. I slowly wiped the thick, freezing mud from my bleeding hands, taking one last long look at the brightly lit window. The tears had completely stopped. The naive, trusting, desperate Clara who had sobbed on the kitchen floor just moments ago was dead, left behind in the freezing Montana dirt. I turned my back on the Silver Creek Lodge, stepping away from the glowing warmth of the windows and disappearing into the brutal, unforgiving blackness of the storm. I dragged my heavy boots through the freezing mud. The icy Montana rain felt like 1,000 needles piercing my skin, but the physical cold was absolutely nothing compared to the agonizing, suffocating pain tearing through my chest. I had lost everything. The Silver Creek Lodge, the thousands of acres of pristine grazing land, the legacy my family had bled for, all of it, completely gone. Swallowed whole by the man I had trusted with my entire life. I stumbled forward into the pitch-black darkness of the wild valley, the violent storm screaming in my ears. I didn't even know where I was going. I just wanted the dark night to swallow me completely. I was so utterly broken, so hopelessly defeated. But then, something shifted in the heavy air. At first, I thought it was just a low roll of thunder bouncing off the jagged mountain peaks, but the deep mechanical rumble kept growing louder, heavier. It vibrated violently through the muddy ground beneath my feet. I stopped, shivering uncontrollably, and turned my head back toward the main valley road. Through the impenetrable wall of the storm, a blinding beam of pure white light suddenly slashed through the darkness, and then another, and another. The deafening roar of massive engines completely overpowered the howling wind. A fleet of heavy, jet-black Ford Raptors tore up the winding dirt road, their massive tires churning the thick mud, headlights blazing like the eyes of predatory wolves hunting in the dead of night. Before I could even process what was happening, the sky above me began to violently tear apart. The heavy, rhythmic beating of rotor blades descended from the clouds, drowning out the storm completely. A massive, sleek private helicopter emerged from the blackness, its powerful searchlight sweeping frantically over the dark pine trees before locking directly onto the muddy driveway of the lodge. With the downdraft whipped the rain into a blinding, chaotic frenzy as the massive machine touched down on the gravel just a few yards from where I stood. The doors of the lead Ford Raptor swung open simultaneously. Tall, broad-shouldered men in dark tactical jackets stepped out into the pouring rain, moving with terrifying, silent precision. They didn't look like federal agents. They looked like a highly trained private army. And then, the side door of the helicopter slid smoothly open. I held my breath, my entire body shaking violently in the freezing wind. A tall, imposing figure stepped down into the storm. He wasn't wearing handcuffs. He wasn't broken, defeated, or bankrupt. He was wearing a perfectly tailored dark wool coat, walking steadily with a heavy silver-tipped cane. His posture as straight and unyielding as a century-old oak tree. "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice completely lost in the roaring chaos of the storm. He stopped, his piercing, commanding eyes locking onto my fragile, mud-soaked frame. The cold, ruthless expression on his face instantly vanished. He dropped his expensive cane right into the mud, rushing forward through the freezing rain, and wrapped his strong, warm arms tightly around me. "Clara, my sweet girl," I've got you." He murmured into my wet hair, holding me fiercely, just like he did when I was a little girl, frightened by the thunder. I broke down completely, burying my face in his coat, sobbing hysterically into his chest. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I'm so incredibly sorry. I lost it. I signed it all away to him. He took the water rights. He took everything." My grandfather didn't yell. He didn't look panicked or angry at me. He just gently pulled back, framing my freezing face in his warm, calloused hands. He looked at me with a calm, absolute certainty that made the chaotic world around us completely stop. "You didn't lose anything, Clara," he said, his voice deep and steady, effortlessly cutting through the noise of the storm. "But the feds, the environmental raid, the frozen accounts." I stammered, frantically wiping the freezing rain from my eyes. "Liam said we were completely ruined." My grandfather slowly stood up to his full, intimidating height. He looked past my shoulder, his eyes narrowing into a lethal, icy glare as he stared up at the brightly lit windows of the Silver Creek Lodge. A low, dark chuckle rumbled deep in his chest. "A federal indictment," he scoffed, his voice dripping with pure, venomous authority. "Do you honestly think a pack of government bureaucrats could take down the Vance empire over a single weekend? There was no raid, Clara. There are no frozen accounts. It was a test, a necessary test I had to run to see the true, ugly nature of the man sleeping in your bed. That fake federal investigation, that was just a match I threw into the dark to see exactly which rats would scurry out of their holes." The realization hit my exhausted brain like a massive physical shockwave. A test. The bankruptcy was a complete lie. The entire crisis was a brilliantly orchestrated illusion. My grandfather hadn't lost a single dime. He had deliberately manufactured the storm just to expose the starving scavenger hiding inside our home. I looked at my grandfather. He's standing there in the rain like an uncrowned king surrounded by his loyal army. The crushing despair in my chest instantly evaporated, replaced by a burning, terrifying surge of pure adrenaline. The Vance Empire wasn't dead. It had just finally gone to war. My grandfather didn't even bother turning the brass handle. He just gave a slight nod, and two of his massive security men kicked the heavy oak doors of the Silver Creek Lodge so hard they completely shattered the lock. The heavy doors slammed violently against the interior walls with a deafening crack that sounded exactly like a rifle shot. We marched right out of the freezing storm and into the warm, brightly lit foyer. My grandfather walked at the front, his heavy boots tracking thick black mud onto the pristine Persian rugs, and I walked right behind him, when no longer a shivering, broken girl, but a true Vance, protected by the absolute full weight of my family. Liam and Wyatt practically jumped out of their skin. Wyatt dropped his glass of expensive whiskey, the amber liquid and crystal shattering all over the stone hearth. Liam froze, his victorious cigar slipping from his fingers and burning directly into the floorboards. The color instantly drained from their faces, shifting from arrogant, drunken triumph to absolute, paralyzing terror. They were completely surrounded in seconds as the tactical team swiftly fanned out, blocking every single exit in the house. "What the hell is this?" Liam finally managed to scream, his voice cracking with pure panic. "You are trespassing. Get out of my house right now, or I swear to God I will call the sheriff." That Wyatt frantically scrambled to the kitchen island, snatching up the stack of documents I had just signed in the dark. He held them up like a pathetic, trembling shield. "You can't touch us, Silas. We have the water rights. Clara signed the full authorization agreement. It is fully notarized and legally binding. You are standing on our property, you old fool." My grandfather didn't even blink. He didn't yell, and he certainly didn't look threatened. He just casually unbuttoned his soaked overcoat, looking around the room with a look of deep, absolute disgust. He turned to the tall, sharp-looking man standing right beside him. It was Mr. Caldwell, the lead litigator for the Vance Family Trust. "Mr. Caldwell," my grandfather said, his voice completely calm, like a judge about to deliver a death sentence. "Please explain to these two incredibly slow gentlemen why they are currently holding a pile of expensive garbage." Mr. Caldwell stepped forward, setting his leather briefcase down on the very same granite counter where I had been crying just 20 minutes ago. He didn't rush. He methodically popped the brass locks, pulled out a dark blue, gold-embossed folder, and slid it across the island toward Liam. "Actually, gentlemen," Mr. Caldwell began, his voice perfectly polite but sharp as a razor, "that piece of paper you are clutching so desperately is entirely legally worthless." Liam's eyes widened in absolute horror. "That is a lie. I have her signature. I have the notary seal. This is an absolute transfer of deed. It would be," Mr. Caldwell replied smoothly, adjusting his glasses, "if Mrs. Vance actually possessed the sole legal authority to transfer those rights. But you see, she does not. And she never did." "What are you talking about?" Wyatt shrieked, his confident facade completely crumbling into hysterical panic. "She is the heir. She was the sole owner on the marriage certificate." Mr. Caldwell smiled, a smile completely devoid of any actual warmth. "You really should have hired a competent attorney before trying to steal a century-old empire, Wyatt. When Mr. Silas Vance gifted this lodge to his granddaughter on her wedding day, he did not hand over a simple deed. The Silver Creek Lodge and all its associated water rights are firmly bound by a restrictive legal covenant, a covenant that explicitly states any attempt to transfer, mortgage, or sell the core assets without the express, or written consent of Silas Vance himself, automatically renders the transaction null and void." "Null and void," Liam repeated, his voice dropping to a hollow, breathless whisper. He stared down at the documents in his hands, his entire body shaking uncontrollably. The papers he had spent 5 long years plotting to get, the papers he had destroyed his marriage, betrayed his wife, and sold his soul for, were just a useless stack of printer paper. I watched the exact moment Liam's reality violently shattered into a million pieces. The smug, superior grin that he had worn while puffing that expensive cigar just completely melted off his face. He looked up at my grandfather, and then he looked deeply at me. The arrogant, victorious cowboy who had laughed at my tears and thrown me into the freezing mud was completely gone, and in his place was just a pathetic, trapped rat. Finally realizing that the cheese he had so cleverly stolen was actually sitting right in the middle of a massive steel trap. The satisfying heavy silence in the room was absolutely intoxicating. The predator had just become the prey. The absolute silence that followed Mr. Caldwell's words was heavy enough to crush bone. Liam just stood there, staring blankly at the dark blue folder resting on the granite island, his mind desperately trying to reject the terrifying reality of what he had just heard. Mr. Caldwell slowly pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, looking at Liam with the polite, clinical detachment of a scientist observing an insect. "The Vance Family Trust," he explained smoothly, his voice echoing perfectly in the quiet room, "is not a standard, boilerplate legal entity you can simply bypass with a forged bank document and a fake notary seal. It is a highly aggressive, meticulously engineered fortress." I stood completely still, listening to the calm, razor-sharp words of our family attorney, and a profound realization began to wash over me. In the English language, the word trust implies faith. It implies a deep, unwavering belief in the inherent goodness and loyalty of another human being. But in the brutal, high-stakes world of the ultra-wealthy, a legal trust is born from the exact opposite. It is born from a cold, paranoid, absolute certainty that human beings are fundamentally flawed, and that greed will always, eventually, corrupt the human heart. When my grandfather handed me the deed to the Silver Creek Lodge on my wedding day, I thought he was giving us a foundation built on love, but he was actually teaching a ruthless, necessary lesson about survival. You see, ordinary people protect their futures with hope. They protect their homes with blind faith in the person sleeping next to them, believing that love is an impenetrable shield. But the elite, the people who actually build empires and control the resources that keep entire valleys alive, they do not ever gamble 100 years of their family's blood, sweat, and legacy on something as incredibly fragile and volatile as human emotion. Love can easily turn to hate in a single afternoon. Vows spoken at a sacred altar can evaporate into thin air the very second the bank accounts dry up. My grandfather knew that. He knew that I was young, hopelessly naive, and blinded by a romanticized version of the world. He didn't try to stop me from marrying the poor, struggling ranch hand I was so desperately in love with, but he made absolutely sure that if that man ever took off his mask, my birthright would be entirely untouchable. Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the Covenant, Mr. Caldwell continued, casually flipping open the heavy document. Any transfer, sale, or leveraging of the core assets, specifically including the primary water rights of the Silver Creek Basin, executed without the direct, notarized, and witnessed consent of the primary grantor, Silas Vance, is immediately designated as a fraudulent conveyance. Your little midnight contract, Liam, is legally classified as an act of theft. Liam's knees literally buckled. He staggered backward, and hitting the edge of the heavy oak dining table. His brother Wyatt was completely paralyzed, his face a pale, sickening shade of gray. They had spent 5 long years plotting, waiting in the shadows, enduring what they felt was the ultimate humiliation of living under my family's shadow. All for a piece of paper that wasn't worth the ink printed on it. My grandfather stepped forward, his heavy boots sounding like a death knell on the hardwood floor. He leaned heavily on his silver-tipped cane, looking down at Liam with a gaze so incredibly cold it could freeze the blood in your veins. "You actually thought you were a mastermind, didn't you?" Silas boomed, his deep voice radiating pure, terrifying authority. "You thought you could hire a fake banker, wait for a terrible storm, and steal my valley right out from under my granddaughter. You thought you found a weakness in her heart, but you were too arrogant to look for the steel wall I built around her inheritance." Liam couldn't even speak. He just opened and closed his mouth, his chest heaving with frantic, shallow breaths. "I set this trap for you the very day you asked for my granddaughter's hand," Silas roared, stepping right into Liam's personal space. "I knew what you were the moment I looked into your hungry, desperate eyes. I knew you didn't love her. You just loved the crown she was wearing, so I gave you enough rope to hang yourself. I just had to wait patiently for you to get hungry enough to finally step on the trigger." I watched Liam slowly slide down the edge of the table until he was sitting on the floor, staring vacantly at the muddy boots of my grandfather's security team. When the crushing weight of his own stupidity had finally broken his mind. He wasn't a clever hunter who had successfully trapped a naive heiress. He was just a greedy, short-sighted little rat who had confidently walked right into the jaws of a lion. Liam dragged a trembling hand down his pale, sweat-soaked face. He looked wildly around the room, glancing at the impassive faces of the security team blocking the doors. The realization that his grand, 5-year master plan had completely evaporated was suffocating him. He slowly pushed himself off the floor, his entire body shaking with a pathetic mixture of rage and absolute defeat. "Fine," he spat, glaring at my grandfather with raw, venomous hatred. "You win, old man. You get to keep your precious dirt and your goddamn cows. You outsmarted the poor, dumb ranch hand." Then he turned to his brother, who was still staring blankly at the worthless stack of documents on the counter. "Come on, Wyatt, we're leaving. We might not be walking out of here as billionaires, but at least we aren't leaving with anything less than we started with. We'll pack our bags, and we'll be gone before sunrise." Liam took a heavy step toward the hallway, but the solid wall of men in dark tactical gear didn't move an inch. My grandfather chuckled, a low, dark, terrifying sound that vibrated deep in his chest. Leaving. He repeated the word slowly, as if tasting it. You think you can try to steal a 100-year-old empire, violently throw my granddaughter out into a freezing storm, and then just casually pack your bags and drive away in the morning. Liam stopped, the remaining color draining from his face. What do you want? Silas, you proved your point. The contract is void. It's over. We're leaving. Oh, the civil matter of the deed is over, my grandfather replied, his voice dropping to a lethal, icy whisper. But we haven't even begun to discuss the criminal matter, Liam. Criminal, Liam stammered, frantically looking between my grandfather and Mr. Caldwell. I didn't commit a crime. I tried to execute a legal transfer of assets. If the trust blocks it, fine, but I didn't break any laws. Silas slowly reached into the deep pocket of his wool coat. He didn't pull out another legal document. He pulled out a small silver USB drive. He tossed it onto the granite island. It landed with a sharp clink right next to the worthless deed. When you decided to manufacture a fake federal crisis to panic my granddaughter, Silas said, his voice echoing perfectly in the dead silence of the room. You couldn't just rely on rumors. You needed a tangible threat. You needed the EPA to actually show up and start asking questions. So, you took a drive up to the upper creek near the old logging road on Tuesday night. Liam completely froze. His breathing stopped. Did you honestly think, Silas continued, taking a slow, menacing step forward, that the man who built the largest ranch in Montana wouldn't have military-grade infrared trail cameras monitoring every single critical water source on this property? Wyatt let out a sharp, terrified gasp, stumbling back from the counter as if the small silver drive was a live hand grenade. I watched the footage myself, Liam. It is remarkably clear, even in the dark. It shows you pulling your truck up to the creek bank, pulling 3 50-gallon drums of industrial solvent out of the bed and dumping them directly into the primary water supply of the Silver Creek Basin. No, Liam whispered, his voice cracking, completely devoid of any remaining bravado. No, you can't. I just wanted to trigger an inspection. You poisoned a protected federal waterway, Silas roared, his voice shaking the massive glass windows. You intentionally contaminated the drinking water of thousands of animals and a dozen downstream farms just to create a fake paper trail for your pathetic little scheme. Mr. Caldwell adjusted his glasses, his tone returning to that calm, clinical detachment. In the state of Montana, Mr. Miller, that is not a simple misdemeanor, given the sheer volume of the chemical solvent and the deliberate, calculated nature of the act. The federal prosecutor has explicitly informed me that they will be pursuing charges of felony eco-terrorism. Eco-terrorism. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. From a disputed civil contract, Silas had masterfully driven Liam straight into the jaws of a federal felony. The trap wasn't just designed to save the ranch, it was designed to completely obliterate the man who tried to steal it. Right on cue. The piercing, unmistakable shriek of police sirens cut through the howling storm outside. The flashing red and blue lights began violently bouncing off the tall pine trees, illuminating the dark driveway as 3 sheriff's cruisers slid to a halt right behind my grandfather's fleet. Liam collapsed. He didn't just sit down, he completely crumpled. The arrogant, or untouchable cowboy fell to his hands and knees on the hardwood floor. Please, Liam sobbed, crawling desperately toward my grandfather's muddy boots. Silas, please, I'm sorry. I was out of my mind. Wyatt put me up to it. He planned the whole thing. Please, Silas, I can't go to federal prison. Wyatt was already crying hysterically in the corner, holding his hands up in surrender as the heavy front doors swung open again, revealing 4 armed deputies stepping out of the freezing rain. I looked down at the man kneeling in front of us. The man who had laughed while I cried in the mud just a few hours ago was now sobbing, begging for mercy in a puddle of melted snow and his own pathetic tears. My grandfather looked down at Liam, his expression completely devoid of any pity. "You wanted to play the game of kings, Liam," he said quietly, or as the deputies moved in with their handcuffs. "Now you get to pay the price. The brutal winter storms have long since passed." The Montana sun feels incredibly warm on my face today as I stand up on the high ridge, looking down at the magnificent Silver Creek Valley. The river is running crystal clear, completely untouched by the toxic poison Liam so desperately tried to drown it in. Thousands of cattle are grazing peacefully across the lower basin, and the lodge stands tall and unyielding against the endless blue horizon. It is finally quiet. The nightmare is truly over. I heard through our family attorneys that Liam was transferred to a maximum security federal penitentiary just last month. He was sentenced to 20 years for felony eco-terrorism and fraud. He is going to spend the next 2 decades of his life staring at a cold, gray concrete wall entirely stripped of the freedom and the wide-open skies he used to take for granted. Wyatt took a plea deal and turned on his own brother, completely destroying whatever pathetic, fragile loyalty they had left. Liam wanted to be a king so desperately that he willingly burned down his own castle. And now he has to rule over a tiny, miserable 6x8 cell. I am not the same woman who sobbed uncontrollably on that freezing kitchen floor. That naive, blindly trusting girl died in the icy mud that night, and I am not sorry to see her go. I don't just ride the horses anymore. I run the board meetings, I negotiate the massive livestock contracts, I manage the critical water rights, and I protect this century-old legacy with a ruthless, unbreakable determination that would make my grandfather incredibly proud. And the pain of Liam's ultimate betrayal left a massive, jagged scar across my heart. But I have learned that scars are just tangible proof that you survived the battle. I learned the hardest way possible that you cannot ever buy loyalty, and you absolutely cannot fix a broken, insecure man by handing him an empire he didn't earn. Love is a beautiful, necessary thing, but blind, unquestioning love is a deadly weapon you hand directly to your enemies. We are all so incredibly desperate to believe in the fairy tale. We want to believe that the person whispering sweet, comforting promises in the dark will be the exact same person holding our hand when the entire world collapses around us. But the absolute truth, the brutal, undeniable reality of human nature, is that a person's true character is never revealed in the comfort of a multi-million-dollar lodge. It is not revealed when the bank accounts are full and the sun is shining. True character is only revealed the very second you have absolutely nothing left to offer them. It is revealed when you are backed into a terrifying corner and they have to make a choice between saving you or saving themselves. Fire tests gold and adversity tests people. Liam failed that test spectacularly, but his failure was the painful medicine I desperately needed to wake up. I had to lose the illusion of a perfect marriage to finally realize my own unimaginable strength. If you are listening to my story right now and you feel that terrible, familiar knot tightening in your stomach, if you are constantly shrinking yourself down to make your partner feel bigger, if you are silently ignoring the glaring red flags just to keep the peace in your home, please, I am begging you to wake up. Do not wait for the catastrophic storm to hit to find out who you are really sleeping next to. Share this story with anyone who needs to hear it. Send it to the woman who is quietly giving everything she has to a man who only knows how to take. Send it to the friend who thinks she has to sacrifice her dignity to keep her relationship alive. We all deserve someone who loves us for who we are, not what we can provide for them. Protect your heart, protect your self-worth, and never ever hand the keys to your life to someone who hasn't proven they are willing to walk through the darkest fire right by your side.